Welcome to While We Were Distracted, the podcast where we explore topics that often get overshadowed in the rush of daily life.
So imagine trying to build a public park for the good of humanity, right? But suddenly you realize you actually need the budget of a global aerospace program just to buy the shovels.
Which sounds completely absurd, honestly.
It really does. But I mean, that is the exact paradox sitting at the heart of, well, the most powerful technology of our generation.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking at the raw, unedited legal transcripts from day 4 of a major court case involving Greg Brockman, the co-founder of OpenAI.
Right, and we're totally bypassing the polished PR tech history here.
Yeah.
We want to examine the actual messy mechanics of how this idealistic open source nonprofit kind of accidentally birthed a $10 billion corporate juggernaut.
Exactly, because these documents, they serve as a sort of financial and psychological autopsy.
Oh, absolutely. We're looking at direct and cross-examinations, personal diary entries, internal emails, things that completely strip away the corporate narratives. This really is the foundational story of who gets to control artificial intelligence. And our mission for this deep dive is to trace that exact dramatic evolution. Like, how did a small group of researchers who pledged to give their work away for free end up creating the closed-door, multi-billion-dollar structure behind the tools you probably use every single day?
It's a huge shift.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this. Because the fundamental crack in the original nonprofit model, it wasn't some sudden pivot toward corporate greed, was it?
No, not at all. The transcripts reveal it was strictly a physics and math problem. Basically, the founders hit a massive wall of computation.
And the story of that wall actually starts with a video game.
It does, yeah.
Back in the early days, OpenAI launched a project to build an AI capable of playing Dota 2, which, for anyone unfamiliar, is not a simple game of chess where you see the whole board.
Right, the complexity is on another level.
Totally. It's this incredibly complex 5-on-5 competitive game with a fog of war, meaning players have hidden information. You have to strategize and react in real time to billions of possible move combinations.
Which perfectly mimics real-world uncertainty, making it the ideal testing ground for complex AI. But the initial scope of this was, well, incredibly modest.
Oh, modest.
The court transcripts detail how researchers Jakub Pachoki and Simon Sidor started training a bot on just 16 CPU cores.
Wow. Just 16.
Yeah, in the context of modern AI, 16 CPU cores is, it's barely a calculator.
But Greg Brockman testifies to this crazy pattern that emerged. Every single week he would check in on the team and they had doubled the number of CPU cores.
They threw 32 at it, then 64.
Then 128. And every single time they doubled the compute power, the AI got noticeably, measurably better. The system never plateaued at all. It just kept improving as long as they fed it more processing power.
And that creates an absolute paradigm shift for the founders. Brockman and Ilya Sutskever, another key founder, they sat down and ran the long-term mathematical projections based on this Dota experiment.
Right, looking at the road ahead.
Exactly. They looked at Moore's law, the historical observation that computing hardware generally doubles in capability roughly every 2 years.
Which is the standard ambient rate of technological progress.
Right. And if they relied on that standard rate, the math showed it would take them 15 years to build artificial general intelligence.
AGI. The absolute holy grail. Basically a system that is as smart or smarter than a human at practically any cognitive task.
And 15 years felt entirely too slow to them, especially with competitors like Google in the mix. So they looked at an alternative. What if they bypassed standard timelines by building custom hardware?
Like specialized chips.
Yes, specifically from a company called Cerebras. The math indicated that if they could string 10,000 of those highly specialized custom computers together into massive server farms, they could compress that 15-year timeline down to just 5 years.
Wait, hold up. That calculation completely changes the nature of the entire organization.
It changes everything.
Because the transcript shows they went from needing tens of millions of dollars, which, is a totally normal, achievable budget for a well-connected nonprofit in Silicon Valley, to realizing they needed a $10 billion budget.
Yeah, that's quite a leap.
How does a nonprofit even ask donors for $10 billion? You can't exactly fund a global data center network with charity galas and philanthropic grants.
You absolutely cannot. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, that massive, unavoidable need for compute became the wedge. It fractured the organization.
So the physical reality of data centers and cooling systems forced the issue.
Exactly. It forced OpenAI to start considering a for-profit arm. They simply could not achieve their stated mission without an unprecedented amount of capital.
So they knew they needed billions, but how do you prove to investors that your research is actually worth that kind of money?
You have to put on a show.
Right. And that show happened in a Seattle gaming arena in August 2017. The Dota 2 bot had advanced to the point where it was competing in a massive public tournament.
The stakes were huge.
And in front of 20,000 screaming fans and this massive live stream audience, this AI bot completely dismantles some of the best human players in the world.
And following that highly public victory, Elon Musk, who was the primary financial backer of OpenAI at the time, sends the team an email.
What does he say?
He calls the Seattle win the triggering event. He decides this is the exact moment they need to formalize the creation of a for-profit entity to, capture the value of what they are building.
So the day after the tournament, Musk invites the founders to a meeting to hammer out the details. And the visual details in the transcript are almost too bizarre for fiction.
They really are.
Musk invites them to a house he had just purchased near Seattle, which he literally describes in his own email as a haunted mansion.
Yeah, and they arrive to find leftover party confetti just scattered all over the floor.
The scene is incredibly visceral. You have the founders of OpenAI sitting on couches in this confetti-covered haunted mansion.
Yeah.
And Amber Heard, who was Musk's girlfriend at the time, is pouring them whiskey.
It's surreal.
Totally surreal. They are gathered in this weird environment to negotiate the corporate structure of a company trying to invent the most powerful technology in human history.
And the atmosphere shifted very quickly once the conversation turned to equity and control.
How so?
Well, Sam Altman proposed a structure that seems standard for a collaborative venture. An equal four-way split of the new for-profit equity among the core founders.
Yeah.
He sort of operated under the assumption that Musk would agree to this egalitarian approach.
But Musk flat out rejects the equal split. He asks, but I get more, right? And counters with a demand for 62.5% of the equity.
Along with unilateral, absolute control of the board of directors.
Right. And his argument was rooted in his own track record. He pointed out that he had built multiple multi-billion-dollar companies. He had 0 startup failures on his resume, and he was the one providing the initial seed capital.
Which, from his perspective, makes sense. The person taking the financial risk and possessing the proven business acumen should hold the reins.
But to the researchers actually building the technology, the idea of giving one single person absolute control over AGI was deeply alarming.
And the transcript provides a very specific earlier incident that explains exactly why they harbored these fears about Musk's leadership style regarding AI.
Oh, right. The so-called stupid AI incident.
Exactly. Back in 2016, an OpenAI researcher named Alec Radford had built a very early, rudimentary version of a language model. This is the distant ancestor of the architecture that would eventually become ChatGPT.
Okay, so they bring Musk in for a demonstration.
Yes. Musk sits down, types a prompt into the chatbot, and the system spits out a hallucinated, nonsensical answer.
And Musk immediately calls the system stupid to the researcher's face. He tells him that random kids on the internet could build a better system.
And according to Brockman's testimony, that interaction absolutely crushed Radford. The psychological toll was severe.
I can imagine.
Radford was so demoralized by this fundamental misunderstanding of his work that he almost quit the field of artificial intelligence entirely. Brockman and Sutskever had to spend significant time counseling him just to keep him at the company.
Because Musk was looking at the clunky output of the moment rather than the underlying mechanism of the technology. He didn't see the spark.
Right, and that blind spot terrified the founders. Brockman and Sutskever realized a profound structural truth in that moment. Their entire founding charter was based on preventing an AGI dictatorship.
The idea that a superintelligent system should not be monopolized by one government or one corporation.
Exactly. They realized you cannot prevent a dictatorship by crowning a king. Handing unilateral control to anyone, even a visionary operator like Musk, fundamentally violated their core mission.
Here's where it gets really interesting. How do you respond to an absolute demand for control from the guy writing all the checks?
You draw a line in the sand.
Exactly. Ilya Sutskever and Greg Brockman sit down and draft what they call an honest thoughts email to Musk. They lay out their position clearly. They say they value his input, they want him involved, but they absolutely cannot give him unilateral control over AGI.
They state that such a concentration of power is just too dangerous for the world.
And in the subsequent meeting to discuss that email, the negotiations completely shatter. The transcripts describe Musk standing up and pacing around the room in frustration.
And he eventually grabs a painting of a Tesla that he had literally just gifted to the founders earlier.
Yeah, he tucks it right under his arm and storms out of the room.
Which is quite the exit.
And he follows up this dramatic exit with an email stating, "I've had enough. This is the final straw." He officially pulls his funding, telling the founders they need to either commit to remaining a pure nonprofit on their own or go start a new venture without him.
He explicitly refuses to provide what he calls free funding for a startup that he does not control.
Right.
Though he does float one alternative proposal.
Right, to solve the compute crisis without relying on traditional venture capital.
Exactly. He suggests merging OpenAI entirely into Tesla.
Because his logic was that Tesla already possessed the billions of dollars in liquid capital required. They could instantly fund a $1 billion a year budget to buy the compute power necessary to reach AGI.
But the founders vehemently oppose this idea because of the underlying corporate mechanics. Tesla is a publicly traded C corporation.
Which means what, exactly?
It means a C corp has a strict, legally binding fiduciary duty to maximize value for its shareholders. If Tesla spends billions developing AGI, Tesla's shareholders would expect to own and monetize that AGI to boost the stock price.
So OpenAI's mission to build AGI for the benefit of all humanity is legally incompatible with a C Corp's mandate.
Precisely. And beyond the legal mismatch, Musk told the founders that the AGI research would have to be kept completely secret from Tesla's own shareholders to avoid market volatility.
Trying to secretly spend $1 billion a year inside a publicly traded company sounds like an operational and compliance nightmare.
Oh, it absolutely is. And this period of deadlock is documented heavily in Greg Brockman's personal diary, which was entered into evidence.
He kept a stream of consciousness journal, right?
Yes, generating over 100 pages during an intense 5 to 6 week window. The entries showcase a profound operational dilemma. He agonizes over the prospect of simply using their board majority to vote Musk out entirely.
But Brockman writes in his diary that executing a board coup to kick Musk out and subsequently taking the company for a profit without him would be morally bankrupt.
It is a raw look at founders starving for compute power.
Yeah, facing the loss of their primary funder, yet refusing to compromise their foundational mission or resort to corporate backstabbing to survive.
But the standoff culminates anyway in February 2018. Musk officially resigns from the board. But his departure is far from quiet.
What happens?
He convenes an all-hands meeting with the 40 to 60 employees working at OpenAI at the time. He stands in front of the team and declares that OpenAI is on a path of certain failure.
Ouch. And he informs the staff that he's going to build AGI at Tesla instead, setting himself up as a direct competitor.
And then he drops a metaphor that left the room stunned. He tells the researchers that if the sheep dictate safety and the wolves do not, there's no purpose.
Wow. The implication being that he wasn't going to let cautious safety protocols slow him down if it meant losing the race to AGI.
Exactly. The researchers in that room, many of whom had dedicated their entire careers to the concept of AI safety, pushed back aggressively against that framing. But the fracture was complete. Musk leaves, taking his checkbook with him.
And I want you to think about the tools you use today. The models generating text, writing code, creating images. That entire technological lineage almost died right in that room because of a standoff over governance and funding.
It was incredibly close.
OpenAI was left with essentially no money, astronomical compute costs, and no clear path forward.
And that existential threat forces OpenAI into its next and arguably most bizarre corporate evolution.
Right, because to survive the post-Musk era, they had to invent a completely novel legal structure, one that could attract massive capital without surrendering the core mission.
They couldn't be a traditional nonprofit, and they refused to be a traditional C Corp.
Mm-hmm.
So in 2018, they create a capped for-profit subsidiary.
Structured as an LP or LLC, right?
Yes, that sits entirely underneath the ultimate control of the original nonprofit board of directors. They transferred the intellectual property, the core algorithms and research, into this new for-profit entity in exchange for what the lawyers deemed fair value.
And they also transitioned the employees into this new subsidiary, which finally allowed them to offer equity compensation. They desperately needed that equity to stop talent from bleeding out to massive competitors like Google.
Exactly.
Wait, let me challenge the structure for a second. An LLC controlled by a nonprofit. How does that even work legally? I mean, if you have investors pouring billions of dollars into a company, how do they not end up holding the steering wheel?
Well, think of the structure like a pressure valve on a massive steam engine. The organization desperately needs financial energy capital to keep the compute engines running.
Okay, I follow.
The capped profits subsidiary allows that heat in by promising investors a return on their money, but the cap acts as the safety valve. It legally ensures that once the investors hit a specific predetermined return, the financial pressure blows off.
So any profit generated beyond that cap flows directly back to the nonprofit to be used for the benefit of humanity.
Exactly, preventing runaway corporate greed from melting down the core mission.
And this bizarre pressure valve structure is what finally allows them to court institutional investors. Enter Microsoft.
The big player.
Yeah, the transcripts reveal the staggering scale of this partnership. Microsoft writes an initial check for $1 billion, then another $2 billion, and eventually a massive $10 billion investment.
Which raises an important question regarding corporate incentives. What exactly does a publicly traded giant like Microsoft get for writing a $10 billion check to a subsidiary that is ultimately controlled by a nonprofit board? A board with zero fiduciary duty to Microsoft's shareholders, mind you.
Good question. And the transcripts detail the exact mechanics of the deal. First, Microsoft secures exclusive cloud provider rights. OpenAI is contractually obligated to use Microsoft Azure for all of their massive computing needs.
Which is incredibly smart.
Right. So in a way, Microsoft is handing OpenAI $10 billion, and OpenAI is turning right around and using a huge chunk of that money to rent Microsoft's own servers.
It's a brilliant infrastructure play. Furthermore, Microsoft secures a massive exclusive license to integrate OpenAI's intellectual property into their own products. But the real financial kicker is the target redemption cap.
Microsoft's return on investment is legally capped at $60 billion.
Yes.
Which is a 6x return on their $10 million investment. So, yes, the profits are technically capped by the pressure valve, but a $60 billion payout is a staggering amount of wealth for an organization operating under a nonprofit umbrella.
And the fragility of this incredibly complex architecture, where a nonprofit board holding no equity controls a $90 billion tech giant heavily bankrolled by Microsoft, exploded into spectacular public view in November 2023.
The famous boardroom coup. The transcripts touch on this briefly, but understanding the mechanism is crucial. Sam Altman was abruptly fired from his own company via an 8-minute video call.
8 minutes.
Yeah, and Greg Brockman finds out moments later and quits in protest. 5 top researchers immediately resign in solidarity. Microsoft realizes their golden investment is in free fall and scrambles to offer Altman and Brockman their own independent AI division inside Microsoft.
And the question everyone asked was, how does a board just fire the CEO of a globally dominant company without even calling their $10 billion investor?
Right.
The answer lies in the exact mechanism we just discussed. The nonprofit board members held zero equity in the capped for-profit. Legally, they had absolutely no financial incentive and therefore no fiduciary duty to protect Microsoft's bottom line.
Their only legal duty was to the nonprofit's charter.
Exactly. When the board felt Altman wasn't being entirely candid, they didn't have to consult shareholders. They had the ultimate legal authority to simply press the eject button.
The structure functioned exactly as designed, but it just couldn't withstand the gravity of the capital and the talent. Within days, the employees threatened to quit en masse, the board crumbled under the pressure, and Altman and Brockman returned.
A wild sequence of events.
Reading these transcripts, you realize how much of this industry relies on deeply irrational human dynamics operating beneath the sterile legal contracts. And honestly, nothing illustrates that tangled web better than the details surrounding board member Siobhan Zillis.
Zillis's involvement really highlights the unique, almost feudal network of trust that governs Silicon Valley, often superseding standard corporate governance protocols.
Because during the tense 2017 Mansion negotiations, Siobhan Zillis was essentially acting as a proxy and liaison for Elon Musk. Even after Musk leaves the company in 2018, Zillis eventually joins the OpenAI board of directors in 2020.
But the transcripts reveal a staggering complication.
Yeah, while she is actively serving on the board of OpenAI, she has IVF twins with Elon Musk, who is by this point openly hostile to OpenAI.
Right. Brockman testifies that Zillis assured the board the relationship was strictly platonic and entirely separate from her professional duties. But from a governance standpoint, the conflict of interest is massive.
It's huge. A sitting board member of an organization building AGI is having children with the CEO of a rival company attempting to do the exact same thing.
And Brockman notes in his testimony that several board members wanted her removed immediately due to the obvious optics and liability.
But incredibly, Altman, Brockman, and Sutskever actually fought to let her stay on the board. They believed they could trust her to manage the conflict of interest personally.
She remained on the board until 2023, only stepping down when Musk officially launched his direct competitor, XAI.
It's just a perfect example of how personal relationships and trust networks often override the strict legal mechanics of the boardroom.
So what does this all mean when we piece the transcripts together? If we zoom out from the confetti on the floor, the 8-minute firings, and the billions of dollars in cloud compute, a clear picture emerges.
The creation of modern AI wasn't a clean, inevitable march of technological progress.
No, it was a desperate scramble for processing power. The sheer physics of computation forced an idealistic group of researchers to effectively cap their organizational soul to survive.
They had to invent a labyrinth of legal loopholes just to afford the servers required to keep building.
And understanding that friction is vital for anyone engaging with AI today. The underlying tension between open-source idealism, the desire to release this technology freely, and the closed-door reality of corporate investments is the defining battle of the tech world right now.
The pressure valve is constantly being tested.
Exactly. It is the invisible architectural force shaping every prompt you type and every output you receive.
I want to leave you with a final unaddressed question buried deep within these transcripts to ponder on your own. We discuss how Microsoft holds an exclusive license to OpenAI's technology, but those contracts contain a very specific legal carve-out.
A fascinating one.
Microsoft immediately loses those exclusive IP rights if and when artificial general intelligence is officially reached.
Because the nonprofit's charter explicitly states that true AGI must be used to benefit all of humanity, not just to pad the bottom line of a single software corporation.
But when that day finally comes, when the machine crosses the threshold from a language model to a true generalized intelligence, who actually gets to decide that the threshold has been crossed?
Right.
Is it the nonprofit board with no financial stake? Is it Microsoft's army of lawyers protecting a $60 billion payout? Or, will the AI itself be the one to inform us?
Now that is a mechanical reality to keep you up at night.
Next time you read a polished timeline of technological breakthroughs, remember to look for the raw computing power and the boardroom ultimatums hiding just beneath the surface. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Keep questioning the information around you, and we'll catch you next time.
Don't forget to like and subscribe for the next episode on While We Were Distracted.